This is the White Coat Investor Podcast, Milestones to Millionaire, celebrating stories of success along the journey to financial freedom. Here is your host, Dr. Jim Dolly.
This is Milestones to Millionaire, podcast number 32, Achieving Public Service Loan Forgiveness. Our sponsor today is DLP Capital Partners, which provides private real estate funds on both the equity and the debt side. Their funds provide solid returns and low correlation with your stocks and bonds. As evergreen funds, they're also far more liquid than most real estate funds. I've invested on both the equity and debt side with them and appreciate the fact that they don't make money until I make money. Learn more about DLP at whitecoatinvestor.com/DLP. All right, we've got a great guest today. We're going to be talking about public service loan forgiveness. Let's get her on the line. All right, our guest today is Jen Gaunt. Welcome to the Milestones to Millionaire podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So how did you pay for your schooling?
So I paid for schooling almost entirely with student loans. I have a wife who was working at the time, and her salary was going to pay most of our living expenses. I was a non-traditional student. I had worked for about 8 years before I went to medical school. I started med school in my early 30s. And so we were kind of accustomed to having my salary to pay for our housing. We owned a home in the District of Columbia. And so it was difficult for us to maintain that same lifestyle without taking out student loans.
So what'd you end up owing when you got out?
I owed about $300,000 when I got out. 190 of that was federal and about 110 was in private loans.
Can you remember the first time you heard about public service loan forgiveness?
I remember, so I started medical school in 2006, and I remember hearing about it, I think shortly after President Bush at the time had signed that law in 2007. So either late 2007 or early 2008, I heard about the program and kind of understood the 4 basic requirements to enroll in the program.
And when did you make a decision to kind of go for it?
Well, the decision was made for me essentially because during residency, now, as you know, most residencies are nonprofit organizations. So as long as I had the right loan type and paid under the right income-driven repayment plan, then all of my residency would count towards my 120 required payments. I did a 4-year residency in internal medicine pediatrics and then did a 3-year fellowship in pediatric critical care. And then an additional
this worked out very well for you then, didn't it?
As a peds cardiac intensivist. So I had 8 years of residency and fellowship training. And so it made a lot of sense. It was no brainer basically to find an attending job that would qualify.
Awesome. So what was the end result? I mean, you made relatively small payments for 8 or 9 years. How much did you eventually have forgiven?
I had $246,000 forgiven, starting with
So you came out with 190 in federal and you had 240 forgiven 10 years later.
Correct.
And how much do you think you actually paid toward your federal loans anyway?
So I actually kept very meticulous records about 7 years in 2017 when PSLF, when the first round of people were eligible. And I was hearing all of these stories about people who thought they had worked for qualifying institutions and then found out they didn't and weren't able to be forgiven. In 2017, I started going back into my records and making sure I had all of the documents, and I did not have many of them, and actually calculated how much I paid. I paid $60,639 over that 10 years.
Wow. This worked out better for you than almost anybody else that has gotten public service loan forgiveness. This is really incredible. So which IDR program were you in?
So I was in the income-based repayment. When I graduated in 2010, there were only 2 options, right? There was income contingent or income-based. Payee and repay did not exist when I graduated, and then I didn't qualify for them when they did come out because my loans were before 2007.
And do you remember what your payments were during residency?
I went back and looked. My earliest payments, my intern year, were $417. Throughout my training, they were as high as $586 a month. My first year of attending, when it was a mix of attending and fellow, was $1,130, and it would have gone up to $1,400 and then $1,600. But those last 15 or 18 months or so were under the CARES Act, so I owed nothing during those
Uh-huh.
months.
Boy, that timing couldn't have been better for you. All right. So who was
It
your
worked out very
servicer?
well.
Who was your
I
servicer?
had multiple servicers. Yeah, I had Great Lakes initially, then I was transferred to Aspire and then Mohila. And finally in 2017, when I kind of realized that I needed to be more on top of things than I was, I transferred to Fed Loan.
So what problems did you run into getting public service loan forgiveness? Was it smooth? Was it rocky? Did you spend 80 hours on the phone dealing with them, or what happened?
So there were a number of nuances to the program that I didn't understand. So I recognized the four major criteria, and so after medical school graduation, I consolidated my loans into direct loans. But I didn't do that until my grace period was up. So I didn't start my payments until January of my intern year, and then I made my payments appropriately, but I didn't recognize that I should have been submitting my employment certification forms yearly. And so I didn't submit my first one until 2017. And it took Fed Loans about 18 months to get my counts correct. So I called them about every 6 months. And then suddenly one day they were correct.
Did you ever consider bagging the whole thing, refinancing the loans and paying them off?
I never considered that given my duration of training.
Yeah, you were still in training the whole time.
Right.
So would you recommend public service loan forgiveness to others in similar situations to yours?
So I don't think anybody should count public service loan forgiveness out while they're in training. And I think that's the similar advice that you give because most residents and then fellows are going to qualify. And I didn't know I was going to be in training for 8 years. At the beginning, I thought I probably would specialize, but I didn't know what that duration would be. And so it made a lot of sense to do those payments during residency and then decide. And if at the 3 year mark, you're going to do emergency medicine and work for private practice, then it makes sense to refinance. But I think don't count yourself out until you've kind of completed training and seen how much you've put into it.
And how much influence do you think the fact that you were going for public service loan forgiveness had on your job selection as an attending?
I asked at every interview I had whether they were, as you probably know, even at academic medical centers, some of the physician groups can be private. So I was not hesitating to ask when I went on my interviews because that was going to make or break a decision for me because I was so far into the program and it was such a large amount of money. In pediatric cardiac critical care, most of those jobs are in academic medicine. And so the job that I wanted worked out to be a job that qualified. Several other jobs that I had been offered also qualified. So it wasn't too challenging for me.
Any tips to help the process go more smoothly for others?
So I think there's a couple of things that I think, especially medical students as they're about to graduate. One is that you should consolidate your loans as soon as you graduate medical school, as soon as your school has let the government know that you're no longer in school, and start those payments right away. Don't go through that 6 month grace period where you don't make any payments. I didn't know that I could file my taxes my fourth year of medical school and then have $0 payments. I sent my pay stub to the government when I was ready to start my income-driven repayment. So file your taxes your fourth year of medical school so you can get $0 payments. I had my payments. I made about 125 payments, but only 120 counted because I missed some important correspondence. I had signed up for electronic correspondence and then I got busy and didn't check the account and it turned out I had missed an income driven repayment recertification and one time my bank account, I closed my bank account and forgot to change over my automatic debit. So as much as it is nice to save trees and not get those paper statements, I am much more in tune with what's happening when I receive something in the mail that tells me, hey, you are lapsed on your payment, or hey, you are due for your income-driven payment recertification. So I would say don't sign up for the electronic statements, or if you do, make sure you're checking your account every month. And then obviously you have to follow the other the other criteria of the plan. I think for some graduating med students, especially now as medical school is getting even more expensive. There are a lot of nuances to which repayment program you take. And so if you don't understand those nuances, it's probably useful to pay somebody for some advice, at least for just starting out, to understand whether you should be in repay or pay or IBR.
Now, how about your other loans? What's the plan for those?
So I was in forbearance on those loans through Residency. Both of the private loan companies had allowed you for 5 years of training. And so I went into repayment after 5 years, paying the bare minimum on those. So by the time I finished fellowship, I owed about $150,000 on that 110. And I've aggressively paid it down since I finished fellowship 3 years ago, and I owe about $40,000 now. So I'm on the
Awesome.
way to being loan free in the next year and a half or so.
Nice work. Well, congratulations on getting public service loan forgiveness. And thank you so much for coming on the podcast to share your stories with others. I know there's a lot of people, maybe not as much this year as last year and the year before, that are wondering if anyone's ever going to get it. So it's awesome to be able to show some examples of people who have received public service loan forgiveness. And it seems like as time goes on, having less and less hassle to get it. So congratulations to
I
you,
think
and
so.
thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
All right. I hope you enjoyed that interview with Dr. Gaunt. Boy, that couldn't have worked out any better. Long training period, right into $0 payments with the student loan holiday. So, I mean, public service loan forgiveness, that's about as good as it gets. So for those of you that are going to do a big, long fellowship, this is a great program. You may not even have to work for a nonprofit for very many years in order to get public service loan forgiveness. So that has really worked out well for a lot of people. And it's going to be more and more and more, especially as we move into 2022, 2023. We're just going to be seeing all kinds of people we know getting public service loan forgiveness. The sponsor for this podcast today was DLP Capital Partners, which provides private real estate funds on both the equity and the debt side. Their funds provide solid returns and low correlation with your stocks and bonds. As evergreen funds, they are also far more liquid than most real estate funds. I've invested with them on both the equity and the debt side and appreciate that they don't make money until I make money. Learn more about DLP at whitecoatinvestor.com/DLP. Keep your head up, shoulders back. You've got this and we can help. We'll see you next time on the Milestones to Millionaire podcast.
My dad, your host, Dr. Dolly, is a practicing emergency physician, blogger, author, and podcaster. He is not a licensed accountant, attorney, or financial advisor, so this podcast is for your entertainment and information only and should not be considered official, personalized financial advice.